Hello, and welcome to our first tutorial in a series of our Newbie Diaries. In this diary, I'll be documenting and sharing my experience as I'm learning the program. This tutorial will be most useful and interesting to you if you're new to R and have very little or none of programming knowledge. Otherwise, it may appear a little too detailed or basic. It's also tailored to Macintosh users, but most of the things are actually standard across operating systems and will be applicable to all users. I'd love to start my diary by talking about reading data into R, since most of the statistical analysis you can do with R actually require you to have some data. Now, there are at least 3 different and simple ways how you can read data into R, and each one has its own pros and cons. Before jumping into details, let's briefly review each one of them. The first one, entering data manually. It's probably the most simple, but it's practical only if you have a very small data set with limited number of observations. The second approach is copying data from clipboard. This method may be especially handy if during analysis you are frequently switching back and forth between R and other programs like Microsoft Excel or Google Spreadsheets. The last method we're going to discuss will let you import data directly from files such as CSV or TXT files. Such files can be exported from many applications where your data will be created and stored. As a bonus, you will also learn how to preview larger datasets in R without having to print entire table in the terminal. Since most data is stored in table format, let's start by creating a table and seeing how we can read this data into R with each of the 3 ways I just described. Let's look at the table I created in Google Spreadsheets. It has 3 variables or columns: name, age, and pet, and 5 observations or rows. It's pretty small and something we can enter into R manually, so let's start with that. To do that, we'll have to know a few basic functions. And to understand them, think about each column in a table as a vector. In R, vector is just an ordered collection of elements of the same type. It can be a collection of numbers or a collection of words, as long as we don't mix them. For example, column name is a vector of 5 words, and column age is a vector of 5 numbers. To put elements into a vector, R uses a function called C, which stands for combine. All you have to do to put elements in a vector is to list them within the brackets of the C function and separate by commas. In addition, if your elements are words or strings in R language, you'll also need to put each word in quotation marks. Then, once vectors are created, they need to be combined together into a table. Our function dataFrame allows us to do that by listing names of vectors within the brackets, separated by commas. No quotation marks are needed in this case. Now, I just mentioned vector names. Where do you get those? We'll make them up, and in order to name each vector, we're going to use assignment operator, which allows to give a name to almost any object in R, including vectors and tables. Finally, since I'm going to share code with you, it is useful to know what the hash operator stands for. It allows you to add comments right into code. Such comments are not going to be interpreted by R, but they can be quite helpful when other people are trying to read your code. So let's see how that works. Here I have my RStudio window open. On the left is the code pane, where I have all my code ready, so I'm just going to execute that line by line. My first vector is the vector of names, which I called name. To enter this into R, I start typing my vector name, followed by assignment operator, and then I use C function to list elements of the vector, separated by commas. Since this vector contains words, I'm also going to put each of them in quotes. I hit enter, and my vector is created. Now, if I type name and hit enter, R will print out the content of this vector. Don't worry that it's horizontal. It really doesn't have orientation, just like in an open space. Second vector age is numeric, so we just need to list numbers separated by commas without using quotation marks. Print it? It's there. Lastly, we need to create vector for pets, which we do exactly in the same way as we did the name vector. Now, all the 3 vectors are ready to be combined into a table with the help of dataFrame function. And let's also give our table a name. I'll just call it my table, so that later I can refer to it without giving the entire code, which was used to create the table. Type the name, followed by assignment operator, followed by function data frame, listing names of our vectors in an order as we would love to see them in the table. Print, and we're done. That was simple, right? But I hope that now you see this method is only good when you have very small data set, such as ours. Now you're going to learn how you can accomplish the same task with much less typing. One of the ways to do that is to copy data to your clipboard. On Macintosh computers, this is done using Ctrl+C hotkey. And then read your clipboard data into R with the help of read clipboard function. Within this function, there is a number of parameters, which you can specify depending on the format of data you copied into the clipboard. But for data copied from most spreadsheet applications, the format is pretty standard and requires only two parameters. First parameter is header, which tells R if it should treat first row as column names, in which case we should put true, or treat first row as first observation, then we should put false. The second parameter is separator, in case of Microsoft Excel or Google Spreadsheets. The separator is tab, indicated by / and small t. Lastly, to be able to use read clipboard function, we are going to need to install some additional packages into R. But do not worry if you know nothing about R packages. I'll try to cover this topic in one of the consequent diaries. Plus, there's plenty of good explanation for what an R package is on the web. For now, just run 2 lines I'll show before using read clipboard function, and that will do. Now, let's switch to the demo. Let me select my table from Google Spreadsheets and copy to clipboard with Ctrl+C hotkey. I can check if it worked by pasting clipboard to a new place. Now, let's read this into R. As I mentioned, we need to install additional packages called psych. I'm going to run 2 commands to install package and then to load package library into R. Now we can use read clipboard function. We start by typing name we make up for the table, followed by an assignment operator, followed by read clipboard function. Within this function, we specify values for 2 parameters. For header, I'm going to put true, since our first row does contain column names. And for separator, I'm going to specify tab, which is denoted by / followed by small t. You may be tempted to avoid typing and copy this function into R. But in that case, you will overwrite your clipboard content and your table won't be read into R. If you're using RStudio, however, this is not going to be a problem, since you can execute code by selecting it and then pressing Run button. Let's check our table. It's there. So instead of typing each entry manually, we were able to read data with just 1 line of code. Pretty neat. But what if your data contains thousands of rows? Copying it to clipboard may be inconvenient or impossible altogether. In such scenarios, there is third option, importing data directly from file. Let's see how it's done. Primary function for importing data from file is read.table. It can be used to import data from different files, including such files as CSV and TXT. However, if you have CSV file, you can also use read.csv function, which allows you to skip a few extra parameters otherwise necessary within read.table function. Also, for both of these functions, there are 2 ways how you can specify which file to read. One way is to put parameter file.choose within the function. This parameter will pop up Finder window, where you will be able to select the file you would love to import. This way is more intuitive for new users, but if you are writing a program where you'll need to read data without human interaction, you can specify file path and file name instead. I'll show how to find this information on Mac. Also, since tables which you may import can be very large, I'll show you a simple way to print out only first 6 rows of the table in our terminal. This comes handy if you want to preview your dataset without actually printing the entire table in the terminal, and thus avoiding cluttering your workspace. Now you should know enough to watch the demo. First, let's export our table as CSV file from Google Spreadsheets. Most applications where you create and store data, for instance database management systems, spreadsheet applications, or web analytics tools, will have this option. Also, to show you how to use more generic function, I'm going to export the same file as TSV. This is an equivalent of TXT file. Now we can start entering code to import first CSV file into R. Type new name followed by assignment operator. Next, enter function read.csv and within its brackets, type file.choose followed by an empty set of brackets. Once you're done, press enter. This should open Finder window where you can navigate your file. In my case, it was saved in Downloads folder. Select File and press Open. If everything was done correctly and you didn't get an error, you should now be able to access data from your file within R by typing name of the table you came up with. Hope that it worked well for you so far. Next, we'll try to import the same file without having to manually select it in Finder window. To do that, we'll use the same function read.csv, but instead of typing file.choose command within the function, we'll just specify file path and name. File path is just a sequence of folder names which contain your file. There's an easy way to get it on Mac by right-clicking on the file and choosing Get Info option. In the window that opens, look for row Where in General section. Copy this path to Interpreter window, followed by /, followed by your file name, including an extension. Do not forget to put entire expression within quotes. Press Enter, and print table by typing its name and pressing Enter once again. More generic function read.table can be used in exactly the same way, by either entering file.choose command within the function or specifying file path and name in quotation marks. The only difference is that you also need to specify additional parameters, which will tell R what format of data you are importing. I'm going to use read.table function to import my TSV file, which I exported from Google Spreadsheets, and I'm going to use file.choose command to avoid typing file path. The first parameter I'm specifying is header, which has value true, since my table does have column name in the first row. Second parameter tells R which kind of separator is used in my data file. Since I'm importing TSV file, which has values separated by tab, I'm specifying that by / followed by small t. That's the standard way for tab-delimited files. Let's check if this works. And it does. Note that we could use the same function to read the CSV file, in which case we would have to specify comma as separator instead of tab. But it's more convenient to use readCSV function in this case, since it allows you to avoid specifying this parameter altogether. Finally, I promised to show you how to preview imported table if its size is very large and you do not want to print entire table in the terminal. To demonstrate that, let's make our table 3 times larger. Export it to CSV file and import to R using read.csv function. Let's print this new table. We have only 15 rows of data, but in real scenarios, you could well have thousands or tens of thousands of rows. To preview larger tables, enter head function and put your table name within the brackets. The command will print out only first 6 rows of the data, allowing to save some space and make sure you're having the right data stored in your variable. And that was our last demo in this diary. Let's do a quick recap of what we learned in this video. As I was saying in the beginning, there are at least 3 simple ways to read data into R. The first option allows to enter data manually by combining values into vector with C function and then combining vectors into a table with data frame function. This approach involves quite a bit of typing and is practical only when your dataset is small. Second approach allows to copy data directly from clipboard by running one simple function which relies on installation of psych package. This method is most convenient if during analysis you are frequently switching back and forth between R and other programs. The third method we reviewed allows to import data directly from files, such as CSV or TXT files, using generic readTable function or its version readCSV for CSV files. This method is most scalable for large datasets, which need to be read with minimum of human intervention. Finally, you just learned about an easy way to preview first 6 rows of any table by typing its name within the head function. To make sure this knowledge sticks better, I encourage you to do some follow-up work. Specifically, you can download all code from tutorial page and practice running it on your own, customizing examples. You can also print out one-page cheat sheet as quick reference and revise it when you have spare moment. Finally, do not stop here and study additional resources linked on the page. Lastly, feel free to leave your comments, feedback, questions, and suggestions for new topics in the comments of the tutorial page or below this video. Thanks for watching and hope to see you in later series.